So you think you know the Dunning-Kruger effect? We've all seen the memes, right? It's become this go-to punchline for overconfident people. But what if I told you there's a huge debate about what actually causes it? Today, we're going to dig into this famous and famously misunderstood quirk of the human mind.
You really have to start with the phrase that kicked this whole thing off. This comes straight from the original 1999 paper by the psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, Unskilled and Unaware of It. Wow, that one sentence just perfectly captures the puzzle they were trying to solve. So what is it exactly? Well, at its heart, it's this fascinating paradox. On one hand, you have people with really low skill in a certain area who are just supremely confident. They think they're amazing. And on the other hand, you have the true experts, the people at the top of their game who often think, oh, this is easy, so it must be easy for everyone. They actually underestimate how good they are. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. This is the raw data that started it all. Dunning and Kruger asked people to rate how funny jokes were, and the results were just wild. Look at this. The performers in the bottom quarter, they scored a measly 12% on average, but they thought they scored around 62%. That's a huge gap. Now, flip to the top performers. They crushed it, scoring 88%, but they actually guessed they were doing worse, around 72%. And this pattern isn't just about reading jokes, it pops up everywhere. So that begs the big question, why? Why do we get it so wrong? Well, the original theory all comes down to one crucial concept, something called metacognition. Metacognition is basically your brain's self-awareness engine. It's that little voice inside that lets you step back and ask, hold on, do I really get this? Or how good am I at this, honestly? It's the skill of judging your own judgment. And this leads us to the absolute core of Dunning and Kruger's original idea, what they called the double burden. And man, is it a vicious cycle. Not only does someone's lack of skill make them perform poorly, but that same lack of skill also makes it impossible for them to even see how badly they're doing. They don't just have the wrong answers, they lack the tools to even recognize what a right answer looks like. Now, this isn't just some weird thing that happens in a lab. A recent study looked at 426 first-semester medical students. Now, you'd think this group would be pretty sharp, pretty self-aware, right? They were asked to predict how well they do on a really tough anatomy exam. And check out the results. This just nails the point home in the real world. Over 80% of these incredibly bright students got it wrong. And just like in the original studies, it was the students who did the worst on the exam who were the most likely to have massively overestimated their scores. It's just powerful proof of this psychological blind spot. So it seems like an open and shut case, right? It's a flaw in our psychology. But what if it's not? Let's switch gears to a really fascinating counter-argument that suggests the answer might not be in our heads at all, but in the math itself. A really compelling paper from researchers Magnus and Parasetsky throws this bombshell question out there. They float this radical idea: what if this whole thing isn't some deep flaw in our thinking, but just a ghost in the machine, a statistical illusion created by how we measure stuff? Their argument is that the effect is what they call a statistical artifact. They're saying it has nothing to do with the lack of metacognition. Instead, it's caused by two super simple things: random noise, which is just the fact that our guesses are never perfect, and something called boundary constraints. Boundary conditions sound complicated, but they're not. It's just the floor and the ceiling on any measurement. If a test is scored from 0 to 100, you literally cannot score 101, and you can't get a -5. And these simple boundaries have a much bigger impact than you'd think. Just think about it this way. If your real score on that test is a 10 out of 100, any random error in your guess is way more likely to be an overestimate, right? I mean, you've got 90 points of room to guess higher, but only 10 points to guess lower. The exact opposite is true for someone who scored a 95. The scale itself kind of squeezes all these random guesses toward the middle, creating what looks like a psychological bias. Okay, so we've got two powerful explanations on the table. One is a story about psychology and self-awareness. The other is a story about just math. Let's put them side by side and see what happens. So first, here's that classic graph we've all seen. You see the low performers way up here, overestimating their skill, and the high performers down here, slightly underestimating. Dunning and Kruger looked at this and said, aha, this is a failure of metacognition. But now, get ready for this. Look at this graph. This was made by a computer simulation. There's zero psychology in it, no metacognition, no ego, nothing. It's just random data points squeezed between a floor of 0 and a ceiling of 100. And yet, it creates the exact same pattern. This right here is the statistical camp's smoking gun. So the whole debate really boils down to this, right? Is the Dunning-Kruger effect a bug in our brain software, a problem with our self-awareness? Or is it simply a feature of how math works, an illusion that pops up anytime you've got these boundaries and a little bit of random guessing? So where does all this leave us? Well, here's the thing. The effect, that pattern of misjudgment, is absolutely real. No one is debating that. We see it everywhere. The real debate is about the cause. And honestly, it's probably not an either-or answer. The math shows how this pattern can just happen naturally, but our own psychological biases and our egos could definitely be pouring gasoline on the fire. But look, regardless of what scientists eventually decide is the main cause, the practical takeaway for us is exactly the same. That gap between what we think we know and what we actually know is a massive challenge for every single one of us. And this is the most important point. The goal here isn't to get a new label to slap on other people. It's not about pointing fingers and saying, "Ha, Dunning-Kruger." No, this is about holding up a mirror. We all have blind spots. Every single one of us is incompetent at something, which means we are all vulnerable to this effect. So, what can we do? How do we fight back and build that better metacognition? Well, the research points to 3 really powerful strategies. First, never stop learning. It's a cliche, but it's true. The more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know. Second, actively ask for honest, constructive feedback. It gives you that outside view you can't get on your own. And third, always question yourself. Make it a habit to challenge your own assumptions and see if they actually hold up. And that's where we'll leave it. The Dunning-Kruger effect, whether it's a bug in our brains or a ghost in the math, is just a fantastic reminder of how incredibly tricky self-knowledge really is. And it forces us to ask a much bigger, more profound question. If we can be so totally blind to our own incompetence, what else about ourselves might we be completely and utterly wrong about?